Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to see you here. We're delighted that you have joined us for this session, A Rights-Based Approach in the Early Learning and Childcare Sector. My name's Carolyn Wells. I work with WASDEC, but I'm here under the project Global Citizenship in Scotland, which is a funded project that supports teachers and schools in Scotland to embed global citizenship and learning for sustainability in their teaching and in their learning. And we're delighted also to be joined by David Dick, who's the National Officer for Education and Equalities for the EIS, but also has particular expertise in early years as a former practitioner himself. So we'll really look forward to David's input in a short while. So as I said, I'm from WASDEC, and WASDEC is one of 3 development education centres in Scotland. So for those of you who are joining us from the north, your local DEC will be Highland One World. For those of you in the east, you'll be aware that ScotDEC is your local DEC, and for those of you in the west, WASDEC is your local DEC centre, and I'll give you details at the end of how you can get in touch. So when we're thinking about the session this afternoon, we're going to be looking at developing our own understanding of human rights and the UNCRC, and really just developing our own confidence in the articles themselves. We'll make some links between the UNCRC and national priorities and guidance. And then we'll think about ways to make rights real in early learning and childcare settings. And really, we're going to look forward to hearing the practice that will be shared from David Dick, who I've already introduced at the beginning of the session. Okay, so just before we start, it's always really helpful for us to reflect on our own current journey in rights and rights respecting journey as a professional, but also possibly personally. So I just wondered if you wanted to take a couple of minutes just to consider where you feel you are on your own rights-based learning journey. Are you near the beginning? Would you position yourselves at 1 or 2, or do you feel that you're quite far down the road, and today's really all about thinking about ways to embed and go deeper with your rights-based journey in your setting? Okay, when we think about rights, all of us come to rights with our own understanding, our own experiences, our own perspective. And I wonder how you would define rights to your learners, or how you would define rights to your parents or your colleagues. It's always interesting just to think about the words that come to mind when we think about rights. And so I wonder if you have a paper beside you, you might just want to take a couple of minutes just to note your own understanding of that word, rights. But it's always helpful to have a definition that we can all go to, that is a definition that is communal and one that really can be the foundation of the work that happens across our individual settings. And so this definition here is one that I particularly like. It comes from the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and it says that human rights are the basic rights and freedoms to which all humans are entitled. They ensure people can live freely and that they are able to flourish, reach their potential and participate in society. They ensure that people are treated fairly and with dignity and respect. And what I particularly love about this, it talks about the fact that we want to ensure that people are ourselves and our learners can live freely, but are able to flourish and reach their potential. So it's not that sense of just survival. What do we need to survive? But what do we need to flourish and really reach our potential? And that's a really important way to view what we do with our learners in all interactions and experiences that we have with them. Also, it's important for us just to take a moment to really position human rights in history, and also the progression into what we now call the UNCRC, thinking particularly about children's rights. And so this is an image that many of you will be familiar with. And I wonder if I were to ask you, what was denied the groups of people that were incarcerated in World War II in the concentration camps? What things were removed from them? What things were taken away from them? And I'm sure you might suggest things like dignity, their name, their freedom, their choices of what to eat, healthy food, clothes, family, identity. All of these things were stripped away from groups of people who were incarcerated in World War II concentration camps. And so, really, in response to that, in a way to prevent these from ever happening again and to establish really a global standard for the dignity and freedoms of all people, there was the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights was established to really provide that global understanding and that global conversation that talked about the fact that we never want to be in this position again. Okay, and the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, was adopted in December the 10th, 1948. So a while ago for many of us. But this declaration set out the fundamental human rights for all people. And you'll see here that Eleanor Roosevelt was playing a really key role as the chair of the Human Rights Commission that drafted that document. And then, really, over a course of a number of years, there began to be an understanding that there was a group of people, children, young adults under the age of 18, that although were also part of the human rights and the Human Rights Declaration, this group of people needed some additional protections and additional provisions to ensure that they were able to flourish and reach their full potential. So the UNCRC, as we know it now, was adopted in 1989. And that was ratified by the UK in 1991. And that really has 54 articles. And really, the first 42 are the ones that we are quite conversant with. That's the ones that we talk about in our settings: the right to a name, the right to identity, the right to be with your family. And the rest of the 12 articles really are for states and for governments to ensure that they are realising children's rights. But you can see here that sometimes we talk about the 3 Ps. And so the articles can be really sorted into provision articles, which are concerned with the growth, survival, and development of our learners. Protection, which is about ensuring that our children, our young people, are protected from all forms of harm and exploitation. And then also participation, which is really about our children and young people being active in their own lives, and they're also in the lives of their communities and the society that they live in. And you'll be familiar with many of these articles. But also important just to also state that Scotland has since worked to incorporate the UNCRC into its own laws. And that has culminated in what I'm sure you already are aware of is the UNCRC Incorporation Scotland Act, which eventually became law really recently in 2024. And this enshrines the articles into Scots law, making it legally binding for public authorities in Scotland, and also providing children with a way to legally challenge breaches of their own rights. So a really significant time in Scotland's journey in rights, and really Scotland is the first devolved nation who has taken this additional step. So much to celebrate. This is a really lovely video that some of you may have come across. It has been created by I Am Me Scotland, and it really just highlights the journey of rights in Scotland and a really lovely way to remind you of the articles. So we'll play this, and if you can't hear this, we'll also ensure that you have the links to this as well. Okay. And when we think about all of those articles that Sebastian has so beautifully reminded us of, this is really a time that when Scotland ratified, or when the UK ratified the UNCRC, Scotland got together and brought education, health, and social work together to talk about a way to ensure rights was at the heart of all decision making processes for our young people. And in 2006, you'll see what began to form as they began to group the articles together. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with GIRFEC, getting it right for every child, but this is really, articles are the foundation of GIRFEC and are really at the heart of what is happening and the decision making processes on a day to day basis for and with our young people. And then just almost finally, I just want to remind you and just kind of highlight some of the important elements of the articles. And sometimes we refer to these as the ABCD of rights. And so rights are, first of all, they're universal. They are for all children everywhere, irrespective of their colour, their identity, their place of birth. They're universal. We're aware that some children, young people, are more vulnerable and may need greater protection to ensure that their rights are met, particularly for children who experience discrimination, for example, because they hold a protected characteristic, or somebody who has an additional support need. But rights are there simply because we are human, so they are universal for all children. They're inherent, they are there from birth. They're inalienable, so they cannot be taken away, they can't be sold, and they are unconditional, so they do not have to be earned. Rights are not a reward, and they're not dependent on a responsibility or performing an action to get. And they are indivisible, so all rights are equally important. And although all rights are equally important, we talk often about the general principle of rights. And these are 4 articles that really provide a lens through which to see all of the other rights. And so Article 2 is about discrimination, and it talks about the fact that the convention applies to everyone. Article 3 is really concerned about the best interests of the child, and that's a term that you'll be very familiar with. And this must be the top priority in all things that affect our children and our young people. Article 6 looks at survival and development. And this is about children having the right to life, and that governments must do all they can to ensure that children survive and develop to their full potential. And finally, the 4th general principle is Article 12 that you'll be familiar with. This is about respecting the views of the child. And this is about the fact that every child has the right to say what they think in all matters that affect them. And they really deserve the right to have their views taken seriously. So this is really a lens through which we can explore and look at all of the other rights within the Convention. And then finally, just in terms of all of the rights and looking at the rights convention, we have a reciprocal relationship with our rights holders. We as adults are duty bearers, and we have the responsibility to ensure that learners' rights are met and that they're respected, they're protected, and that they're fulfilled. And our rights holders, our children and young people, are the ones who claim rights from the duty bearers. So there's that really important relationship when we're talking about rights and in that space of embedding rights within our settings. There's a really lovely quote here that has been adapted from a statement in the Together Scotland report that is highlighted in Education Scotland's Recognising and Realising Children's Rights. And it says that rights are the starting point for the delivery of an early years curriculum where children are treated with dignity, respect, and kept free from harm. And so we're going to look at what does that absolutely look like for us in our settings, and how can we ensure that rights is embedded across all of our experiences and outcomes within our early year setting. And it's at this point that I'm going to hand over to David, and I'll allow David to introduce himself. But David, thank you so much for being with us today and for taking this time to share your expertise and your knowledge.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Yeah, it's absolutely my pleasure to be here today and to be talking about children's rights in early years. Yeah, my name is David Dick. I am now National Officer for Education and Equalities at the EIS, which is Scotland's largest teacher trade union. And that is a post I've taken up since May. And for the past 20 years, I've been working as a nursery teacher. So really, this presentation today is drawn from those 20 years of experience working in centres and settings across South Lanarkshire. I worked peripatetically and I was also in one centre for about 10 years. So we will crack on. Now, I think when we think about children's rights, it's really, really important that in our early year settings that we can understand how children's rights underpin sort of everything that we do. So when this slide says here, children can learn through rights and they can learn about rights, what I'm trying to highlight here is that the most important thing is for children to have the experience of their rights being realised throughout their day in nursery. I think with the renewed focus on the UNCRC because of it coming into Scots law, settings may be tempted to say we're going to have a big focus on UNCRC and go down pathways of things like we'll have a right of the month or we'll get a storybook and we'll teach children about their rights. And there is a small place for that, but really the most important thing is for our policies, our guidance and our practice and our settings to be firmly based on allowing children to experience their rights being realised. And that's kind of the main message of this presentation today. Now, the good news is the early years settings and nursery classes in Scotland will already be following a rights-based approach because the UNCRC, although it's in Scots law now, has always formed part of the suite of guidance that sat behind a lot of the legislation that governs things like the Curriculum for Excellence, realising the ambition, and you know, when any of the settings I've been in, I've always seen multiple examples of children's rights being realised and threaded through the pedagogy and the thinking and the practice in the whole setting. So you'll see a lot of things in this presentation today and you'll be thinking, I do that, or we do that, and that's absolutely amazing. And I will also want you to think critically and think, okay, we say we listen to children's views, but do we really, you know, and maybe have that critical lens going back after the presentation to really ask questions about, are you doing things in a deep and meaningful way, or are you just paying lip service to some of the things that we're going to talk about? So I think what is really important is that everyone in your setting is aware of the UNCRC because it is part of Scots law now. So it's really important that practitioners, other adults that are coming in, other agencies that are coming in to work with children, and parents and carers are all aware of how the UNCRC now underpins so many of the things that are happening in your setting. And I would be saying that in particular for your early years practitioners and teachers that are working in the setting, that they are aware and are able to talk about the differences in the UNCRC and how they inform different aspects of practice going forward. And the reason that I'm saying that is because we're now in the context of the Shared Quality Improvement Framework just being launched actually this month. And the UNCRC is one of the key foundational documents that have fed into the creation of this new shared inspection framework. So it's the UNCRC and the Health and Social Care Standards. So it really is important that practitioners and people that are coming into your setting or coming in to work with children are aware of the ways that the UNCRC underpins the kinds of things that are happening. And here's just a wee quote from the quality framework, which highlights what I was saying there. So this is one of the very good examples from it. So it says, we make very good use of professional development opportunities that link directly to enhanced outcomes for children, their individual learning needs and the improvement plan. Research, best practice, national and local policy underpinning legislation, the UNCRC and the Health and Social Care Standards are used in this process. So they're really highlighting the importance of having a rights-based approach and having that deep understanding of how it is affecting things that are taking place in the setting. So when we're thinking about taking a children's human rights approach to learning and care, what kind of things does that kind of look like? So we'll start at the top there. We're talking about equality and non-discrimination. So, the UNCRC was formulated to try and give children that equitable start to their lives. And as Caroline was saying, as the duty bearers, as the adults involved in children's lives, it's really up to us to ensure that those equality, equitable and diverse principles are threaded through everything that we do with children, and that we're giving them those opportunities to realise their rights. The next one's empowerment, and that's a really important aspect of working in an early years setting, because we're trying to empower children. We want children to be confident individuals. We want them to be effective contributors in line with the curriculum for excellence. We want to empower them and give them the confidence to go about their play-based environment, make choices, make independent choices, make friends, become socially confident, and discover their own kind of talents and their own interests. And that has to be done on an individual level. So empowerment's a really important aspect there. Accountability is, again, going back to that important role of the adult, important role of your organisation, the setting, also the wider context, the learning community, how it fits in with the schools around you, wider community organisations around you. All that kind of accountability lands on adults' doorstep, because it is our responsibility to make sure that the UNCRC has been carried out for children. Participation is a really important thing for early learning and childcare settings, because it's through children's participation that we create the curriculum. Now, we've got the curriculum for excellence and we've got Realising the Ambition, and they're both really good, fantastic documents. But when we're thinking about the word curriculum, which is the totality of children's experiences in and outside of the setting, it's really important that we've got mechanisms for children to participate in decision making and planning, and what the environment looks like, and the kind of activities that take place, because it's through that kind of participation that they will discover that sense of themselves as being an active citizen in Scotland. And that kind of sense of being an active citizen will build as they go through primary and into secondary. And finally, the last one here is embedding, which is really going back to that thing about you already be doing a lot of it, because you've already put children's human rights at the core of planning and at the core of things like support for additional support needs, and just involving children and their parents and their carers in every kind of step of your process. So we're going to have a focus now on learning and teaching. The EIS has published a document there. It's called Playing for a Brighter Future, which is specifically for early years settings and early years classrooms. And that is available on the EIS website. So if you want to have a look at that. And really, we want to have a strong focus on learning and teaching in our settings, because it's through education and through quality education that those rights for children to have that right to quality education will actually be realised. So again, we're going back to that word about embedding, right? So when children's rights are embedded in your approach to planning for learning and teaching, and here's this graphic is from Realising the Ambition, and I think it is, Realising the Ambition is very child-centred and has got a lot of good advice. And this is quite a key kind of graphic from it, and it's showing the cycle of how children will be participating in your planning process. Now, settings can write planning, settings can have a weekly plan, a daily plan, settings might be using things like 4 books, settings might not be using any kind of formal written planning and doing it in a different way, a more responsive approach. So this isn't about a one-size-fits-all, but it's about having certain core elements to any kind of learning cycle that we all need to be kind of following. And it's starting with observation, it's starting with watching children, understanding what their interests are, understanding what their needs might be. And it's about having that key adult, who it could be a teacher or it could be a practitioner, who is able to take forward an interest or develop some kind of learning outcome or experience or activity that will support the children and progress their learning. So that can be responsive and that can be intentional as well. And then you're facilitating those experiences. You're facilitating it with an adult-led experience, or you're facilitating it through your environment. And then you're evaluating it again. So you're going back to the beginning and you're thinking, well, what worked there? What was the result? Was learning achieved? What are your recording processes? What are your assessment processes? It brings everything into the cycle, and then you keep going. And I think in our early year settings, if we want effective learning and teaching to take place, it's crucial that there is time for collegiate discussion. And I know it's really hard in the 1140s environment because staff are all on shifts. You know, if you're in a centre between 8 and 6, staff are all on shifts, and trying to get that time to talk about what's happening in your playroom, what's been effective, is more difficult. But I would urge you, if you can factor in time once a week or once a fortnight to try and get at least some of your practitioners and teachers together to discuss learning, it is always of real benefit, I think, to the setting. So in terms of a small planning cycle, if you were thinking about wanting to do something, again, this builds on realising the ambition, and it's just kind of what I was talking about. You're wanting to get a teachable moment, a seed of learning, something that you can hang your hat on and say, there's something I could do here. And then you want to make that seed grow. So that's about the practitioner thinking about identifying learning goals and skills. That you need to be aware of what the curriculum for excellence entails. You would be hopefully have undergone by now different kind of moderation processes which really unpick some of the learning that's sitting behind some of those experiences and outcomes, understanding what that looks like in a play-based environment, providing children with those experiences and resources for them to explore through play and through your high quality interactions, evaluating, as I said, and then thinking about that next step. You know, it's not, the process doesn't end after the evaluation. You're always thinking, what can we do next? Do we need to do something slightly different, or can we expand? Can we progress this? Can we add depth to it? And a further context at the moment which is unfolding in Scottish education, which will impact all levels of the curriculum, is the Scottish curriculum improvement cycle. And Education Scotland are looking at the curriculum for excellence, and they're seeking to adapt it, and they are going to change elements of it, but they're not throwing everything out. So they're looking at introducing some things called big ideas, which is a return to a more knowledge-based, content-based kind of curriculum input that will have an impact on the way that you plan and the way that you think about experiences. And also they're going to have what are called cross-cutting themes, which will sit underneath different subject areas. Some of those cross-cutting themes at the moment are things like political literacy or learning for sustainability, which we're going to talk about a wee bit more in depth. So those are the two big changes, and I'm flagging it up today just so that we're all kind of aware that this change is going to be coming and that we can adapt to it. Because obviously it's called improvement, so they're wanting the curriculum to be better. And when we're thinking about that quality education as part of children's human rights, this is another step towards that. So early learning and childcare will be a very important part of that curriculum cycle. Now, if we turn back to thinking about giving children those experiences of their rights actually being realised in the moment, realised on a daily basis, realised throughout their time in nursery, whether they've come into your setting as a baby, as a toddler, or a 3-year-old. And we'll just talk about some of the things that are here. So most play-based environments, and these will be, you recognise so many things that you're already doing from this particular slide. So that independent choice, are your areas set up for children to access them by themselves? Can they walk into the setting at 8:05 and think, I want to go and paint a picture? You know, is your art area set up in time for them? Are they able to access things at their level? Are they able to make choices about whether they want to be inside or outside? Are they able to make choices about whether they want to be in a quiet space or a more noisy space? Are you refreshing and looking at like your storybooks to keep that interest up so that they're making those choices all the time? Or are adults making the choices about the environment? That's a question you need to ask yourself. Are children in charge, or are adults in charge? Or are you trying to find a balance between who's actually choosing? A flexible environment just means that the environment can be changed at times, so that if a child or a group of children are showing a particular interest in something, you can move the environment around to perhaps give yourself some more space, or you've got some open-ended costumes or materials and stuff like that you could easily create some imaginative play around. You want an environment that enables creativity, so you need to get rid of things that I still see sometimes, unfortunately, things like templates and colouring in sheets and a lot of things printed from the internet, from various companies that are out there that want to give you sort of photocopied sheets all the time. All that kind of stuff really doesn't have a place in any kind of early year setting in Scotland. And the reason is it takes children away from being more creative. There's, you could argue that there's a little bit of learning in some of those things, but really it takes children away from that kind of creative spark. So we need to think about embedding creativity throughout the environment. That leads on to those kind of things like open-ended resources, which can be used in multiple different ways, which can be used in symbolic play. That's often a great opportunity for an adult. If you've got wooden blocks and different things, an adult can step in and show role model to children how they can be used in all sorts of different formations. And once that practice is sort of embedded in your setting, children will end up doing that themselves. Learning with and without an adult. So children are learning from the environment on their own sometimes, but adults are a key part of that environment and understand that their interactions, their questioning, their open questioning can expand children's thinking in the moment. Experimenting. We've got support for ASN learners. So you'll be thinking, Caroline was talking earlier about GIRFEC, and that's such an important part of the UNCRC. And you'll have different supports for additional support needs learners in your setting. It should also feed into all your staged intervention processes and all your close working with multi-agency working and also with parents and carers as well. You want an environment that develops confidence. So that's also about having some areas of challenge where children can put themselves out their comfort zone. Outdoors is often a good place for that as well, things to climb on, things to run down, things to explore, physical resources, all those kind of things can really develop children's confidence in an effective way. You want to encourage that curiosity. Children are naturally curious. You want them to be coming into the playroom and, want to go and explore, or there's a brand new resource, or sometimes we talk a lot in early years about provocations. Provocations are a really good way of like putting something new out for children and then an adult standing back to see what they're going to do because they're following their own curiosity. I've said a bit about that indoors and outdoors. Most early year settings have got really robust approaches to outdoor play, understand the value of it, understand that children should be going in and out all day with as much free flow outdoor play as possible. Refreshing it often will keep children's interests. And if you're planning those kind of experiences that we were talking about when we were looking at the planning cycle, you want children to be able to come and revisit learning. Children need time to go home, think about things, assimilate. That kind of process can take days or weeks even sometimes. So you do need to keep some things in your environment that will give children those opportunities to come back and build on what they've already learned. And having that awareness amongst your staff, amongst your practitioners and your teachers, that your environment should be based on children's interests and needs. And that comes down to your noticing is such a good word, I think, in early years. What are you noticing about children? What are you observing about them? But I think noticing is even more important than observing. There's something more human-based about that. What have you noticed there? And it can be a small, tiny thing, but you would be amazed at when you act on what you've noticed about children and you put that into your environment, it can really bring a lot of benefits and interests for them. So we'll go back to talking about supporting learners with additional support needs very briefly. You will all be up to speed with all your GIRFEC processes, and we know that we're in a context just like primary and secondary where there is a higher rate of additional support of children with additional support needs. When Audit Scotland published the report a few months ago, the current rate of additional support needs in Scotland on average is around 40%. So I know you will already have all those kind of rights-based approaches to supporting children with ASN, and early years environments in particular are incredibly inclusive places for children to be in and also for adults to work in. So again, you're following a rights-based approach when you can evidence how you support additional support needs learners in your setting. And when we're thinking about participation and involving children in planning or asking them about what the environment should be like, we also need to remember that our earlier settings also have toddlers and baby rooms. And in that ABCDE of rights that Caroline was talking about, rights are present from birth. And babies are, even from their birth, they are forming their personalities. They are beginning to make choices. They're beginning to communicate their choices. And it's really important that our early year settings and our practitioners that are working in the baby and toddler room in particular are really, really attuned to what is called here the voice of the baby and the infant. And if you Google voice of the baby and the infant, there's really helpful resources out there about how to approach thinking about the voice of the baby and thinking about the voice of the infant, and how these views can be incorporated in a meaningful way into your practice. And it is really going back to those key human rights about participation, about having your voice listened to from birth. Another human right that underpins a lot of what we do in Scotland is the right to diversity, the right to have that kind of equality and equity embedded. And I think for early year settings, it's particularly about visibility, I think. So children who are coming in from all manner of families, whether it's a single parent family, whether it's a foster carer, whether it's a family of a different race or ethnicity, whether it's a child that's coming in with LGBT parents, they need to come in and see their family structures represented in stories in particular. And I think when you put these kind of diverse storybooks into your story corner, storybooks are really an important tool because they open up conversations with children. So children will rightly notice difference, but a storybook kind of gives you that way of opening up a conversation in a child-friendly way where difference can be celebrated, difference can be explored. And I know certainly when I have in particular worked with LGBT parents in nursery and brought in those kind of storybooks, they've given me feedback to say that their child felt quite affirmed by it, and was proud to go and show their friends storybooks like that. So diversity is a really important thing to do, and also it's about getting parents into the setting as well to maybe talk about different cultural events, different religious events. Children will really enjoy learning about food, learning about clothes and all the different things that go along with cultural celebrations. So that's a really important thing. The photograph there is from a setting that we did based around, it was called a Someone You Love tea, and parents and carers were invited in and had like a sort of afternoon tea with children and met the other parents and had just an opportunity to meet each other and talk to each other, and it was just a really nice thing to do. So now when we're talking about diversity and we're talking about children's human rights, this is a resource from the EIS, which is a storybook. I was in a working party that helped create this storybook. It's bespoke for Scotland, so you'll recognise, even from that picture, a lot of good practice in early years. You've got your loose parts outside, you've got your sort of wooden toys and your natural materials inside, your cosy spaces. And this storybook is about a refugee girl coming to her first day in nursery, and it's a really worthwhile resource. Again, using that kind of storybook as a tool to explore issues with children surrounding human rights in a really child-friendly way. And it's also available in different languages. So if anybody would like a copy of this, you can contact either myself at the EIS, or you can contact Caroline and she'll pass your details on to me, and we can get you a book sent out, and you can tell me if you need it in different languages. So we're going to talk a wee bit more about learning for sustainability, purely because, one, it's a key feature of the Scottish Government's drive towards Target 2030. Learning for sustainability is also predicated upon adult human rights and on children's human rights, and it also is cognisant of the Sustainable Development Goals, which are from the UN. And this is a sketch note from Education Scotland. I personally think it's a really useful tool to look at because it shows, and this sketch note is for early years primary and secondary, but you'll see from it that, again, you'll be doing so many things in your setting around learning for sustainability. You'll be probably doing recycling, you'll be doing clothes swaps, you'll be working with your local community, you'll be going out to the forest, you will be doing all those things I was talking about earlier about, being an active citizen and respecting your children and incorporating their views into things. And learning for sustainability, as I said, is going to be one of those cross-cutting themes of the new curriculum improvement cycle. So it is important, I think, for all nursery settings to be aware of what learning for sustainability means. It means much more than just recycling. And if you're taking that children's rights approach to it, I think the sketch note's a really good starting point. So we're going to watch a little video now about this. Was a setting I was working in Rutherglen. It was called Glenborough, and it was linked to learning for sustainability. And this is about how children's rights can be realised outside of the setting and the opportunities that can arise when you explore your local community and when you work with other organisations. This organisation was called Grow 73, and they work with adults, and they have created this kind of amazing space in Rutherglen for children and adults to share. So yeah, so that wee video just highlights lots of different examples of children having their rights realised through their experiences in an environment that's out with the setting. Now, action in poverty is another thing that early years schools and settings it's become an increase, and sadly it's become an increasingly important feature of nursery life. So we've got things like clothes swaps, we've got toy swaps, we're having to have food bank collections, we're often having to have free food given out to parents, food that hasn't been used. This was these are pictures from a nursery called Westburn in South Lanarkshire, who were collecting food for their local community. They're in the lowest percentile of the Scottish Index for multiple deprivation, but food bank issues, food poverty, fuel poverty are all issues that are affecting so many communities in Scotland at the moment. So when we're thinking about children coming to nursery, and when we're thinking in particular about readiness to learn in early years, readiness to learn in primary and secondary, coming to nursery hungry or coming to school hungry actually prevents you from fully learning. So tackling poverty at a national level is really of crucial importance for from a children's rights perspective, because they will not get that right to a quality education if they're suffering the effects of poverty. Again, the EIS have got a poverty booklet that was published last year, Standing Up to Poverty, which has got guidance about some of those things I was talking about: the children's rights landscape, poverty-related stigma, hunger, the cost of the school day, the cost of uniform. We've now got, since the pandemic, issues around digital poverty, access to digital technologies, a lot of misconceptions about children and adults at home being able to access things like the internet and having appropriate devices to do schoolwork on. And also the cost of activities as well now, the cost of fun activities, the cost of a day out with your setting. All these are kind of factors that we all need to be aware of, and we need to think how we realise children's rights in that very, very difficult environment. So we'll be finishing soon, and so this is just kind of to sum up the next two slides. What I would be suggesting to go forward with your UNCRC approach would be for you to have some kind of training for all staff, just to get everybody on the same page about the things we've been talking about today, so that they know that children's rights underpin so many things. And I think when you give that kind of training and you're having those conversations, even informally, when your inspectors are coming out, or when parents and carers are coming into the setting or whatever, you're able to discuss how important children's rights are, and highlight how your practice is realising it for the children. You want to go back to your vision, values and aims. Most settings will have a form of that. You want to maybe think about how children's rights could be incorporated into that. You will maybe want to think about how children's rights are evidenced in your setting. Are you going to evidence it through learning journals? Are you going to evidence it through wall displays? Are you going to evidence it through, maybe mentions of children's rights in your planning? And decide how you're going to, again, use that information to share it with parents and carers, so that they're understanding that children's rights are underpinning so many of the things that also they have got a responsibility at home to do as well. Early year settings and parents and carers are working in conjunction to realise children's rights. So sometimes parents can appreciate a bit of guidance, a bit of family learning, how things can be done at home to support their child's journey. Finally, another thing you might want to do, I've seen it happening in other settings, they created a UNCRC working party to discuss all the things we've been talking about today, assess kind of where your setting is with children's rights and how that could be progressed. Again, talking about making those references, including them into articles and planning, learning journals, the wall displays, your communications, thinking about having short reminders about UNCRC approaches in your setting, maybe on the in-service days, or if you get any of that collegiate time I was talking about, which I know is really difficult, but you could talk about the UNCRC a wee bit in those discussions as well. And also how you would incorporate the UNCRC into staff peer and self-evaluation processes. You know, when you're doing your self-evaluation as a setting, when you're thinking about your improvement plan, how can UNCRC be incorporated into that as well? And this is my final slide, and this is taken from an academic article called Towards a Pedagogy of Hope. And I just think it's a nice child-friendly way of thinking about how children's rights are being realised in your setting. And yeah, I've just put it up here to have a nice little positive, hopeful slide to finish on, and I'll pass you back to Caroline. So thanks very much for your time today. Cheers.
Thanks so much, David. And I've heard David a few times now, and I keep hearing new things and inspired by new things that he said. I love that idea of noticing children and just the power of noticing, but also someone you love tea. That's definitely something that I think we should share. We should start a movement, someone you love tea, and get that moving. David, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us and really for giving us some really practical ways that we can really deepen and embed children's rights into our settings and really ensure that our learners are thriving as they are part of our daily teaching and learning experiences. So thank you so much for this. And it's always lovely when things come together. And just ending on that slide, looking at the pedagogy of hope, the work of Paulo Freire is really what underpins global citizenship. And global citizenship is really a values and a skills-based approach to learning, where we're developing learners who are thriving and able to thrive in the world that they are living in. And so it's really that approach that underpins the head, heart and hands approach to learning that is really about developing engaged and really transformed learners and transformative learning. So just as we finish here, there's a few different resources that I wanted to highlight for you. And you'll remember that David has peppered some really helpful resources throughout the session that he's just been talking through. So Playing for a Brighter Future EIS document, also Mochara Goes to Nursery. So don't want you to forget to note that one down either. And then also just thinking about the document there that's Standing Up for Poverty. So these are some really helpful resources that I think are web-based, David, that practitioners and colleagues can access. But there's some other resources that I just want to highlight very briefly to you. This is a resource that was developed in Edinburgh City Council through Rights in the Early Years, and it really brings together policy documents and highlights where rights sits within all of them. So you'll recognise in so many of these, realising the ambition, how good is our early learning and childcare sector, health and social care standards, etc. But it also shares ways that you can explore rights through your learning, which is something that David highlighted right at the beginning, and really looking at different articles and how to ensure that children are experiencing and feeling those articles. That sense of feeling your rights is so important for our early learners. And this document gives a really helpful, practical way that you can do that. And you can see also that it has links to Shinari or the wellbeing indicators as well. That's a really helpful resource for you and for your colleagues. Just very quickly, here's a QR code for you if you want to access that. And also the Children's Parliament a couple of years ago had a project where they have now looked at rights in the early years and really exploring with parents and practitioners how to embed the articles in our learning experiences and really looking at also what are some of the barriers. And so as a result of that project, they have produced this really useful document that again just embeds the articles and highlights the articles, looks at the way they relate to Hegel L and Gerfeck, and then looks at how you can really develop them and ensure that your learners are sensing and feeling what those rights are. They have looked at something called the 5 pillars of rights, and this is really as a result of that project that they undertook in 2023, and it really just talks about rights in terms of the relationship and culture of rights, how you develop agency in young learners, how you develop awareness and understanding of the rights themselves, the importance of us as practitioners, as professionals, what are we modelling to our learners in terms of how we relate to each other and what we say and what we do, and then also that development and that ensuring that our learners are conversant with a rights-based language. So these are the 5 pillars that they have pulled out in some really helpful reading for you. And again, here is the QR code. A nice online document that you can access for parents that just looks at rights that you can use and highlight to your parents. And again, I've popped the QR code there for you. And our sister organisation, Highland One World, have developed Seeds for Change, which is a resource that you can find on their website, Highland One World, and it looks at developing global citizenship through play, and really that idea of ensuring that our children, our learners, are developing the skills to be conversant in developing global citizens, and how you can really embed that at an early level as well. And again, the QR code for that. And then almost finally, a couple of years ago, we've developed a brand new online anti-racist education resource, and we developed this WASDEC and ScotDec in partnership together. And it's really a web-based resource that really looks at how you can develop anti-racist practice with your early years practitioners, and so explores through the 9 curriculum principles, the anti-racist principles, and really it highlights how you can develop experiences, spaces and interactions really intentionally to ensure that you are embedding an anti-racist curriculum into your centres. And here is just where you go into at the early level. And Signpost is our online magazine where we kind of hold, it's more of an online library where we kind of hold web-based resources that you can access, and on that there is a PDF of fiction books, and David highlighted the importance of our fiction books, particularly within our early learning settings. And there's a whole list here of really great storybooks that you can access that explores diversity, anti-racist education, gender, looking at all different areas that you can explore with your learners. And finally, just want to say thank you for your time. I hope that you have found this useful. Do let us know, and please be in touch if there's any way we can further help or support you. But thank you so much.